Hey guys, Juro here, bringing you guys a YouTube video. So I decided to start supplementing my Twitch content, which you should totally check out, by the way, twitch.tv/Juro1, with YouTube videos. So I'm on the subreddit a lot, on the Azur Lane subreddit. I'm on the question mega thread. There's a lot of questions on there that people keep asking. I'm seeing a pattern of the same questions being asked over and over. So I decided to start making some YouTube videos in order to start answering some of those questions. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about what PR1 ships to get. I know PR2 is just around the corner, but there's a lot of new players that are coming because of starting to play Azur Lane because of the anime, and a lot of them are just kind of getting to the point where they're asking themselves, all right, which PR1 ship should I be working on? Which one's good? I don't know what I'm doing. Somebody help me out. So that's what I'm here for. I'm going to start talking about what ships are good to start off with first. So I'm going to be talking about the rough order that you should be doing them in. I'm going to be talking about what ships to use for each of those ships as well. I'm going to give you guys some overall tips and tricks in order to make that process a bit faster. And then lastly, I'm going to be telling you where to farm. That seems to be a really common question, is like, where can I maximize my experience? We'll talk about that near the end. So the first things first is, how do PR ships work? Well, how does research work? So essentially, they're just really long projects that you're going to be working on for months. So in order to even get a ship, you need to finish a list of tasks. Now, the most difficult task, the big bottleneck, is the combat data collection. So depending on the ship that you're working on will require a certain type of faction and type of ship. So for Izumo, in this case, requires Sakura Empire battleships, aviation battleships, or battle cruisers. Saint Louis requires Eagle Union light cruisers, heavy cruisers. Rune requires Iron Blood light cruisers, heavy cruisers. Ibuki requires IJN light cruisers, heavy cruisers. Monarch requires HMS battleships, battle cruisers. And then lastly, Neptune requires HMS light cruisers and heavy cruisers. A lot of this is going to be what ships you should be using, and because of that, you also want to make sure that you're not using ships that you're going to be investing a ton into in order to farm for this PR ship, and then suddenly you're not going to use them anymore because it turns out that they're not so good. And that's the case for some of these ships, that you will have to use ships that you may not want to use and you may not want to use in the future. And that's why you have to be able to pick an order that hinders your general progression the least. For instance, I'm not going to be recommending you guys to do Rune first, because Rune requires for you to do some heavy investment into some KMS ships that you're likely never going to use ever again. And if you do that in the early game, you're going to be losing a ton of resources and you're going to hinder your progression. This video is about maximizing your progression while still being able to farm for PR1 ships. Once you receive a PR ship, let's say you finished everything, you got your 3 million experience, you receive it, she'll be dev level 1 and she will be no good. She's not going to be doing a whole lot of damage. You're gonna be super excited. You're gonna throw her into the fleets, and she's not going to be doing anything. I mean, other than the fact she's going to be level 1, her dev level is also going to be level 1, and her dev level is a way that you enhance PR ships. Now, PR ships don't actually become usable until they get to dev level 20 at the very least, preferably dev level 25. You need 133 blueprints in order to get a ship to dev level 20, which makes her usable. And then after that, you need, in total, from 1 to 30, you need 343 blueprints. After you get a ship to dev level 30, like I have with Monarch here, you'll unlock what's called Fate Simulation. So Fate Simulation is essentially another place for you to dump your blueprints once you've maxed one out. So I got my ship to level 30, dev level 30. What am I going to do with my blueprints now? You're going to work on your Fate Simulation. So this gives, for the first few levels, it gives luck to your PR ships. Now, luck is a completely I could do a whole video on luck, but essentially it affects some things such as crit rate and evasion rate, makes them that a bit better. Not super critical, but still makes them a little bit better. And then at the end here, you actually get a buff for one of their skills. Generally not a game-breaking buff, it's just a bit of a buff to make them even better, and kind of work a bigger goal to work towards to max out Fate Simulation. So to get from 0 to 5, you need another 165 blueprints. Once you max out Fate 5 Simulation, let's say I max out Fate 5 for Rune. If I get any more Rune blueprints, they're just going to sit in my inventory. There's no current use for them, but for most people that won't happen for a long time. So now that I've kind of explained how the general research ship mechanic works, we're going to start talking about individual ships now. So there's 2 ships that I think are the correct options for which one you should start first. You can either pick Monarch or you can pick Saint Louis. Now, Monarch is a really good HMS battle cruiser. She does really strong damage because her barrage is really powerful. She has a really powerful barrage at dev level 30 becomes really good. And then on top of that, she has a heal once she reaches below 20% health at level 10. So it makes her really tanky and makes her do a ton of damage. What else do you need? On the other hand, you have Saint Louis. She actually has, I believe, one of the highest DPS as a heavy cruiser in the game. She does a ton of damage. Her blue skill increases her speed by 8 and will increase her evasion by 35% for the first 40 seconds of the sortie, which is incredibly powerful. Generally, heavy cruisers are known to not have a lot of evasion. They're generally known to be a little bit on the squishier side. They have problems with evasion. Her skill takes care of that really well. So she becomes fairly tanky with her evasion boost. And then on top of that, she has an HE modifier, increases her HE damage by 35%. Just really powerful. She has huge damage, really good heavy cruiser. Even though she is technically not a USS ship, she is a French ship. Her name is Saint Louis. Saint Louis requires USS light cruisers or heavy cruisers in order to, as for her combat data collection. Monarch requires, you may have guessed it, HMS battleships and battle cruisers for her combat data collection. So now I'm going to talk about what ships you should be using for each of these ships. So for Monarch, you have some options as a new player. There's quite a few permanently available options. And the reason why, again, why I am suggesting Monarch as your first PR ship is because these are ships that you're going to be using throughout the game and that you should be leveling up anyway. So it's really good to start leveling them up. And on top of that, you'll be able to work on Monarch as your PR ship. They're going to be good ships. You should be leveling them up anyway. Your progress is not going to be hindered by picking Monarch as your first PR ship. So you have Warspite. If you were around for the Warspite retrofit event that just happened about a month ago, and you have her retrofit event, she's a good ship to start leveling up and working towards that. You have Hood. Hood is extremely powerful, probably the best permanently available battle cruiser in the game. Her barrage is extremely powerful. It makes it really easy to get MVP. Make sure that you're including Hood if you have her in your fleet. Next, you have Rodney and Nelson. They're essentially the same. There's small differences in terms of stats, but they're essentially the same ship. They're really good farming battleships. They're lower cost because they're elites, and then they have a barrage that allows you to clear the map fairly okay. They only have a 40% proc rate for their barrage, but they're again good ships. Lastly, you have Queen Elizabeth, who buffs all of your HMS fleet or your HMS ships in your fleet that you're using to farm for Monarch, which makes it just that much easier. So similar to Monarch, the ships that you're going to be using to farm for Saint Louis are also really good ships that are easily available early on and will be very powerful throughout the whole game. I'm talking ships like Phoenix, great mob fleet ship, Montpellier, essentially any Cleveland class ship, Montpellier, Cleveland, Denver, if you manage to pull for her. You have Portland. Her retrofit is really strong, so you got to level her up and work towards that. Helena's really good in the boss fleet, another really good ship. If you maybe want to try and use Brooklyn's not too bad either. She has a cruiser buff as well. And then lastly, San Diego's a bit of a wild card. Not a whole lot of new players will likely have her retrofit item, but San Diego does have a retrofit that makes her very powerful. In the early game, she's not so great. But if maybe you started playing, you got the retrofit item and then you took a break and now you're back, if you do have the San Diego retrofit item, then go ahead and use San Diego in your farming fleet for Saint Louis in order to work towards that. So again, these are all ships that are not going to hinder your progress, your overall progress. You're still going to be leveling up powerful ships and not sacrificing anything by picking Saint Louis. The next two ships that I'm going to talk about are the ones that should be your third or fourth picks. These are going to be Neptune and Rune. So I'm going to talk about Neptune first. Neptune, again, she's a basically better Phoenix. She has a self-heal as well. Once she reaches 20% health, she'll recover 25% of her health and increase her reload. Really powerful. And on top of that, she has an AP damage modifier, which increases her AP damage. So she's going to do really big damage. She's got great survivability because of her blue skill and self-healing. Every single sortie she can do that, just like Phoenix. So she's really strong in that regard. Really good for farming. Rune is a heavy cruiser. She's incredibly strong. She does a ton of damage. Her blue skill allows puts a shield up that will actually shield your whole vanguard. So she's a bit less selfish. Then Saint Louis, because Saint Louis increased her evasion, and that's how she increased her survivability. Rune puts out a shield for everybody in the front line, so everybody in the front line is protected by the shield, so increases survivability there. She also has her red skill that is a bit more complicated to read, but the TLDR of that is that Rune does a lot of damage. So again, heavy cruiser, increases survivability and does a lot of damage. Rune is really strong. So now we're going to talk about what ships you should be using to farm for each of these ships. I'm going to start off with Neptune, simply because she requires a bit less investment. So you have ships like Belfast permanently available, Aurora is in the gacha permanently available, Leander is really strong, she has a smoke screen with her retrofit, increases survivability of your Vanguard. London retrofit does a ton of damage because of her incredibly high auxiliary gun efficiency. She does a lot of damage. She's also really good. Edinburgh, and that's how you pronounce it, by the way, not Edinburgh, it's Edinburgh. Edinburgh is fairly tanky, actually. She can hold her own and is a really good ship to put beside London in order to protect London. And then Ajax, she also has a retrofit. I don't have her. Those are probably the top ships that I would pick. Reminder that at this point you're probably two PR1 ships in, so that means you're probably maybe 2-3 months into the game at this point. You're going to have the resources to retrofit Leander, retrofit London. This is going to be a ship that's going to be likely your third or fourth option, so don't be too scared that, oh my god, how am I supposed to retrofit all these ships? You're going to have a lot of time. By this time you'll have Monarch St. Louis, you'll have a lot more resources. This is you're a bit more into the game at this point. Next, we have the ships that you're going to be using to farm for Rune. Now, as you can see, there's not a whole lot of options. It's going to be even tricky to even unlock her development at all, because you need a certain amount of KMS Vanguard units. It is possible to do so without the German event, the Divergent Chessboards event. You just need to max limit break Karlsruhe, Köln, and work on limit break Königsberg, I think maybe once or twice. And then you'll be able to unlock Leipzig from the collection, and then you'll be able to use her. So again, you don't have a whole lot of options, and your options are kind of mediocre. Now, this is the reason why Rune's grind is considered one of the hardest. It's because you're going to be putting a lot of investment into ships that are not particularly good, and you're not going to be using a whole lot in the late game. You're going to be, I'm talking about, you know, ships like Karlsruhe, Köln, they're not so good. I mean, they're okay, but they're not going to be used in the late game. So if you're picking Rune first as your first PR ship, you're going to be hindering your progression a lot. You're going to be using resources that are going onto ships that are not going to be particularly good. Now, if you really like KMS ships, and you know you're just in love with Leipzig, you're in love with Prince Eugen, and you just want to get Rune first because you're in love with Rune, by all means, go ahead. Just know that you are hurting your overall progression by doing that. You're setting yourself a little bit behind, because you're going to be putting so much of your early resources into ships that are not going to be particularly good later on. So now, in terms of what ships to use, I'm going to personally just recommend what I used. I think this is the most efficient fleet, as long as you don't care about the other ships. Like, if you really want to use Graf Spee, then just use Graf Spee. Don't worry about it. Just cut someone out from the fleet that I'm about to suggest and just use Graf Spee. But in my opinion, you should be using Karlsruhe retrofit, Köln retrofit, and Leipzig retrofit. These are some 3 really good retrofit. Leipzig is incredibly strong. She will be getting MVP most of the time, most likely. So Leipzig is really easy at getting MVP, and then Karlsruhe and Köln are just commons that have a retrofit, so they just have a bunch of more stats. They're really cheap on oil and will go along with Leipzig really well, because they're cruisers, and Leipzig buffs cruisers as well. So you're going to be doing a fair bit of damage. You're going to be fairly tanky, and you're going to have a ship that is going to be getting MVP most of the time, which will allow you to manipulate and get more experience out of your farming with Leipzig. So in my opinion, those are the 3 that you should be using. Again, if you really like Prince Eugen and you just want to use Prince Eugen, by all means just use Prince Eugen. But these are the 3 that I would recommend, the ones that I personally use to farm for Rune. And again, at this point, you have 2 PR ships in your pocket. I'm talking 2-3 months from now, once you're starting to farm, and you'll have the retrofit blueprints to get the Karlsruhe, Köln, and Leipzig retrofits. Don't worry about it too much. Again, this is a long-term grind for these. Now, the last 2 ships that I'm going to be talking about are going to be Ibuki and Izumo. Now, in my opinion, these are the ships that you should save for last, and I'm going to explain why. Ibuki is a bit of a niche ship. She has really high torp, fairly strong. She has torp preload. She has a chance to launch a special barrage when she launches her torp, and then on top of that, increases crit rate and crit damage. So she's really strong, and she has Siren Killer as well. So she's really good in terms of her torps, but you're not going to be using them fairly often for like auto farming a whole lot of things. So she has a bit of a niche, kind of like Ayanami. And then on top of that, the best ships that you want to be using in order to farm for Ibuki are higher world ship drops. I'm talking about Jinsu, I'm talking about Sendai, these ships that drop in world 10 and 11. You're not going to have them early on, you know, even maybe 2-3 months in, you're not going to have them. In my opinion, it's just not worth it to be using worse ships and investing into worse ships when you can just wait it out a little bit, especially when the ship isn't particularly critical to have. The good thing about Ibuki is that there is a ship called Yubari, an IGN cruiser that increases the experience that cruisers get on your fleet. So she's also IGN, which means that she will be counting as well, and on top of that she'll be giving a boost to your other cruisers in experience. The other ship I'm going to be talking about next is Izumo. Similar to Ibuki, she's a bit of a niche ship. She's considered the worst PR ship, and I say worst because in reality all the PR ships are good, but a lot of them are, I mean, some are better than others, and Izumo unfortunately is the least good out of them until she gets like Fate 5 and her barrage changes, which makes her a bit better. But again, that's a huge investment, and at that point you might as well just keep working on Monarch. So Izumo, again, similar reason to Ibuki, other than being a niche ship. The ships that you want to use in order to work on Izumo, you're likely not going to have even 2 to 3 months in. I'm talking about event ships like Nagato and Amagi. Those events need to rerun still. If you don't have them as a new player, you're not going to have Nagato or Amagi, and these are the two best IGN battleship battle cruisers in the game. And if you don't have them, then in my opinion, it's just not worth working on Izumo first. Now, of course, if she's your waifu, by all means, go get her as however you can. But in my opinion, if we're trying to talk about overall progression and being efficient, Izumo should probably be saved for last or second to last, along with Ibuki. Now I'm going to talk about the ships that you can use and to farm for Ibuki. So like I mentioned, we have Sendai and Jinsu, the first two ships right here, very strong cruisers. Next we have Isuzu. So Isuzu drops in 7-3, and the good thing about Isuzu is that she has really high anti-air. And if you manage to get to World 12 before you start working on Ibuki, Isuzu and Jinsu were the two ships that I was using in World 12 to farm World 12, and they worked out really well because Jinsu has really good surface fleet and she's fairly tanky, and then Isuzu just provided all the anti-air I needed. Takao and Atago, I just can't seriously recommend them for farming. They're not very good, unfortunately. So it's difficult to farm for Ibuki early on. That's why I don't recommend until your 5th or 6th ship. When you have Sendai, you have Jinsu, you have Isuzu. Sendai and Jinsu are just really, really strong. You want to wait until you have those, essentially, in order to farm as efficiently as possible. Now, finally, we reach the ships to use to farm for Izumo. So now we have ships that are not permanently available. Again, this would be super hard to farm for as a new player. Mikasa is event. Issei and Hyuga are now in the permanent pool, so you can get Hyuga. Hyuga's really good. I highly recommend you use her. And other than that, you'd have basically Fusuo and Yamashiro, which are not particularly great. And again, I think it's just worth saving until you get Amagi, you get Nagato, at least one of them, so you can start working on them. When you're leveling them up, you kill 2 birds with 1 stone and work on Izumo while you're leveling up your Nagato and or Amagi. It's pretty difficult to do it otherwise. The next best ships, like I just mentioned, would probably be Hyuga, Fusuo, Yamashiro, and that's not super great. I would not recommend trying to do that. So that's why I kind of would highly recommend that you focus on Izumo maybe last, unless you really absolutely want to. Then by all means you can use other ships. But when with this video we're talking about efficiency and not hurting your overall progression, this is a reason why I would wait for any of these event ships and save her for last. So now that we've talked about all of the ships, now I'm going to kind of share some general tips for you guys, how to maximize your experience gain. Tip number 1, unlock the 2nd floor of the dorm and put all 3 of the ships that you're using into the 2nd floor of the dorm. Now there's 2 reasons for that. First reason, it'll allow you to farm for longer. The 2nd floor of the dorm regenerates morale, which means that your morale will last for longer because it's being regenerated at the same time. So you'll be able to farm for longer without getting that happy face and decreasing their morale too much. Second reason is that the 2nd floor of the dorm can actually increase morale to 150, which means that I believe it's from 120 morale to 150 morale. You can actually get an experience boost from having your ships at high morale, which is obviously very important. The whole point of you doing this is trying to maximize experience boost. You actually get a 20% experience boost if you have ships at high morale and you're using your ships when they're at high morale. So it's very critical that you put your ships into the second floor of the dorm, get that 20% experience boost by increasing their morale as high as possible, and basically keeping them in there until you finish your grind. Second tip would be MVP manipulation. The MVP manipulation, basically as it sounds, is you want to manipulate who gets MVP. If you're using backline ships to farm for Monarch, for instance, you want to make sure that one of those ships gets MVP, preferably the flagship. So let's put Hood on the flagship because she's more likely to get MVP because her barrage does so much damage. Hood in the flagship, good choice. In the front line, it's a bit more difficult simply because there's no flagship spot, and generally your backline does more damage than your front line. It's easier for some ships than others. You may have to maybe gimp your backline ship a little bit. Let's say you're using, I don't know, let's say you're farming for Rune, you have your KMS grind, and you want to use Bismarck because Bismarck buffs Iron Blood ships, even though Bismarck is not permanently available. But let's say you do. Bismarck is likely going to be taking MVP every single time simply because she does a ton of damage. So what you can do is you can try and take her main gun away, maybe give her a really bad gun. There's some really bad guns out there that will actually basically do 0 damage with their salvo. So MVP manipulation refers to manipulating your other ships such that your frontline or the ship that you care about gets MVP. Now for the frontline, it doesn't matter which one they're on the front line because there's no flagship spot. But like I said, as an example, maybe take your backline's gun away so they don't do more damage than your front line, so your front line gets MVP. It's going to make it harder to clear harder content, but it's going to be worth it because MVP is ×2 and you're going to get double the experience on a ship, which is very important. Lastly, I'm going to talk about where to farm, and this is going to be a really easy question to answer. The answer is wherever you want. There are optimal places that give you the most experience for your oil, but not to a significant degree to overlook other places that give other gear or ships. You basically want to be just leveling up your ships and getting experience while you're farming for other things. You want to be killing 2 birds with 1 stone. You don't want to be farming a specific map like 8-4 or 12-2 like you hear on the Reddit mega thread, because that's where people told you to, because that's the most experience gained. Yes, you'll technically be gaining experience maybe at a rate of 5% faster, but you'll also be getting nothing else for your oil. You want to make sure you're using your oil to farm for a ship drop, farm for gear, farm an event, do something else with your oil. Don't just be farming and do nothing else with it. It's not worth it. Don't pigeonhole yourself to a map just because somebody said so. I'm hoping this video helped a lot of you guys out. Remember, this is going to be a long-term goal. It's going to be a long-term project. It's not going to be done overnight. It's going to be months long. Be patient, have fun. Remember, it's just a game. If you guys, again, this video focused on being efficient with your oil and your progress and not hindering your progression. If you guys have like waifu preferences that you absolutely want to use in a fleet and it's not one of the ships that I mentioned, then by all means use her. It's not a big deal. This just focused on progression, and I basically talked about what I used and what I considered when I started farming for these ships as well. So if you guys like what you see, don't be afraid to hit that subscribe button or the follow button on my Twitch stream, twitch.tv/Jordo1. I stream Azure Lane 2 to 3 times a week at the very least. Come check me out. And yeah, I hope this video helped you guys out. I'll be putting out more videos in the near future. And yeah, thank you guys for watching. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.